I had no idea what I was going to do with my life, zero. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just work in education. I was doing community relations, and we hired a new superintendent, and we were going to just totally transform things. And of course, I showed up in my U-Haul from Washington, where I came down after teaching at the Naval Academy, and the superintendent got fired in that meeting that I went to, and so it became very different. And the bond issue that we planned to rebuild all the schools in the underserved areas and was coming up. And that was when this guy, Mike Levy, came into my office. And he said, Hugh Rice Kelly, he was the editor of the Rice Thresher after Griffin Smith, said, I should talk to you. I said, what? What about? He said, I'm starting this new magazine. It's going to be about Texas. It's going to Texas is not just a collection of cities. It's a consciousness. It's a state of mind. Here are these magazines, New York, Philadelphia, New Yorker. They're doing all this in the East and for these cities. Texas is ready for this. And I'd love to talk to you about being the editor. I said, me? I just got back from Vietnam a year ago. I haven't been in Texas in 7 years. I wrote for the Rice Thresher. I was an intern at the Houston Post in the summer, and I did a couple of articles for The Economist. And he said, well, no, people say, that I should talk to you. So we talked, and he asked me to submit a few things, and he was talking to everybody. He went to see hundreds of people. He was completely insane. I mean, he was interviewing Mimi, I forget who he was interviewing, and it was a pouring down Houston rainstorm, and he had this big sample case of all his magazines in it, and he strode out into the 3 inches of water, and he walked right into the swimming pool. And I swear, I just said, you just kept walking across the bottom, came out again, kept going with your briefcase. Said I couldn't do it because I've got this big bond issue, and it's going to be great, and I'm going to pass it, and we're going to move forward. He said, okay. So the bond issue then went down 2-1, a total failure. Well, I can't even do this. So I called him back. I said, Mike, is that still open, that job? And he said, yeah, it is. So why don't we do it? So I thought, this is great. We can do this magazine. And I had no idea who to hire. I knew no Texas writers, nobody. And so I called Griffin Smith and Greg Curtis and Paul Burka, my old Rice friends from the Thresher, and I said, look, if you've got a day job, don't quit it. But if you want something to do, I'm going to start this magazine, and maybe it'll be 6 months or at most a year, and we'll have a good time, and then we'll go out to real life. And Griffin and Paul were both working at the legislature, but they said they'd help as they could. And Greg loaded his car up. He was printing, Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers comics in San Francisco, loaded his Volkswagen up and came in together with Greg and I and Mike and Richard West, carried furniture up the stairs at this walk up above a barber shop on Guadalupe Street, and sat down and looked, and the walls were empty, and there was no typewriters, no coffee shop, no nothing. And we had no ideas, we had no writers, and so it was like, what now? And we had like 4 months to put out a magazine, and we didn't even have a name. Levy was going to call it Texas Cities, but that really it didn't capture his vision, really. Because his whole vision was, we're more than the cities. So I went, and I just thought, well, what's it about? It's Texas, and how often does it come out? 12 times a year? Well, let's just call it what it is, Texas Monthly. So we did. And that's this. It was really like one of those old Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland movies where they say, let's go out to the garage and put on a show. And as odd as it was, we really thought we could do it. Even in spite of what I said earlier, we thought we can do this. But the idea was, if the New Yorker or Esquire was the standard, we were going to be as good as they were, or better. We weren't going to be pretty good and say, well, it's not national quality, but we are in Texas and it's good for Texas. It was like, we're going to hold ourselves to those standards or better, or we're not going to do it. So we're 27 years old. I mean, it was insane. And Levy was 25. And there was something about the fact that we didn't know what we were doing. And We didn't know of the usual people, and we didn't know it shouldn't work, but so it worked anyway. And here it is, 50 years later, and a lot of these things here are really interesting. They're like notebooks with our issue plans, moving several months forward, and lots of cross-outs because they would fall through or writers would disappear. We had 4 months to get out that first issue, and that was a miracle. We didn't have an art director. We had to improvise. We knew what we wanted, but the writing was good, but the actual look took a while to settle in. But we got that first issue out, and we went to Schultz's and celebrated. We found some mistakes and things, and Greg turned to me and said, "We have to do another one?" And so it was about the 6th or 7th issue where we were really starting to roll and it was getting good. And we thought, we can do this. This could really work. And then I think I found an apartment with a year lease, and it just seemed to. It was a wonderful connection of right people, right time, right place. And by the way, Bill Wittliff, again, I'd gone to talk to him about it before we started, and he had started the Encino Press, and he was about my age at the time, or even a little younger, probably a little younger. And he said, "Look, you can do this. Texas is wide open. It's the one place in the country you can do things like this." And I said, "Well, I don't know anything about magazines. Didn't know anything about publishing." And the answer is just doing it. I became a book publisher by saying I'm a book publisher, and you can edit this, you can do it, you can. And I even wrote Claude Coburn, the journalist father of my friends in England, and told him what was going on and said, "Should I do this?" And he wrote back and said, "My boy, you must." And so we had a kind of confidence, and it built, and we went. It was probably the end of year 2, where it really started. We got a National Magazine Award for our first year, which was kind of astonishing. Which was us rubes went up to New York, and the whole magazine world is there, and they were announcing the winners. And then for general excellence, it was Esquire, New York, New Yorker, probably I don't know what, and us, and they announced us as the winner, and it was like, wait, is there some mistake? And that's when we realized, well, actually, maybe we were fulfilling that ambition we had to be as good as anything. And I think it was really like the stories then and the writers. So many people, the new ones had grown up like I had, in Texas, and thinking this experience was incredible, but once we realized we could write about it, and we gave ourselves permission to write about it, the stories were just everywhere. Everywhere you looked. And often we found, and this is especially true of true crime stories, that stories that everybody had read, they hadn't read the story. And that what we were able to do is bring really great writers to go into something that people thought they knew, and to bring out with all the things they didn't know, and to make it real, and to create something that they could go back to over and over. And like some of our true crime stories from 30, 40 years ago, if they reprint them, go right to the top of our most read things online. They're just timeless. Jack Ruby, everybody thought but Gary Cartwright, it's one of the most amazing stories. And the line in there is, this Jack Ruby, who always wanted to be in the spotlight, when his moment came, his back was to the camera. It's one of the greatest lines I think ever written. There he is. But it was just fun to think of, let's have Gary Cartwright write about Jack Ruby. He was in Dallas, and so bingo. Among those new writers and young writers was Steve Harrigan, who was a poet, and he had this lawn mowing company called Coronado's Children Precision Lawn Cutting Team, power mowing team. And he was cutting my yard. And he also started writing for Texas Monthly. And his first story was so good that we got him a feature. And I said, you don't have to cut yards anymore. He said, well, what, you pay freelancers now? Maybe I do. He has been with Texas Monthly since year one, and is really probably the heart and soul of it. And the joy of it is, and I think it's reflected in this whole collection, everywhere, is that the photographers who saw Texas with fresh eyes brought their visions, the illustrators who had the imagination to create something that was not in life, but was able to convey some of the ideas. But we brought Texas to Texans in a way, I think, that let them see themselves in an elevated way that they never imagined before, and also become more aware of what Texas is. And so oddly, over the years, Texas was our playground and it served us. And now I think when people come in, that so many new people, like the dynamic then was a lot of the people were moving from the small towns to the Texas cities, right? And then, as Larry McMurtry said, and they were becoming symbolic frontiersmen. But now, the last 20 years, they've been moving from all over the world to Texas, right? Without the stop at the small towns in between. And what tells them, where do they go to find out what Texas is? Here, right? So it's kind of like the collection here, whereas the archive is a record, it's also an inspiration, right? It's a record of the past, but it's an inspiration, and it's also ongoing in the present, and it's an inspiration for the future. And I think Texas Monthly and the Wittliff and our natural partnership, because it's just, they both serve the culture of this state. It's really interesting to watch this and to see this, because it was probably the most fun I ever had. And I'm working with people I loved and doing something new. And so many great writers came on board and joined us. Gary Cartwright was the very first one. Larry King, Sherry Kafka. But then we developed so many great new writers. You know, Al Reinert, Jan Reed, Richard West, of course Griffin, Paul, and Greg. The list goes on and on. I mean, I'm leaving lots of people out. But, you know, it's just, this is a lot of my life in this. I mean, every issue has a lot of memories. A lot of memories. Wow.